Hashem's Vasai Tiftach Lupi Akitzal Sacha. We're now in the 11th Perek of Melachim Alef, and in this Perek we say goodbye to Shlomo HaMelech, but we don't say goodbye to him in very pleasant terms. From the first pasuk of this Perek, we learn that the King Shlomo loved women, a lot of foreign women, Nashim Nachrios Rabos, the Es Bas Paro. So in addition to Bas Paro, he had someone from Moab, from Ammon, from Edom, from Sidon, from the Hittites, and from all of the nations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the Bnei Israel, don't associate with them, don't join them, because what will happen is that Ya'atu es lavavchem, they're going to cause your heart to go in the wrong way. And Davak Shlomo la'ava, but Shlomo clung to and loved. And he had 700 wives and 300 pilagshim, and his wives turned his heart away. Ve'atu nashav es libo. So what's going on here? What in the world is happening? That it gets worse. Right after we find out that he has 1,000 wives. Now that's already a problem, so to speak. Why? Because what the pasuk is highlighting is the antithesis of what he, as a king, is supposed to, how he's supposed to act. We know that a king is not allowed to have so many wives, and he has so many wives. And we're learning different pieces of this. Not that he just had a lot of wives, but he had non-Jewish wives. So what in the world is going on? And in his old age, what happens is, Hetu et lavavo, did it actually, his wives turned Shlomo's heart away into Acharei Elohim Achirim, V'lo haya lavavo shalim im Hashem Elokav, Kilavav David Aviv? Really? That he was not wholeheartedly devoted to Hashem like his father David? And he followed the Ashros, the Elohei Sidoni, and all of the different abominations of all of the Ammon, of all the different people. How is that even possible? So the Gemara, first of all, says that anyone that says that Shlomo HaMelech sinned is in error. That isn't actually what happens. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved Shlomo. Perhaps, number one, is to understand that the way that Shlomo HaMelech is judged is very, very sternly and severely, because tzaddikim are judged in a very strong way. But let's understand, what is the fundamental mentality? What was his goal in having so many women? So the idea of all of these women have something in common, and that is it's a political alliance. He is definitely not loving these women in the way that there's an emotional connection, but it's very clear that he is using them the way that in those times that's how they used, which was to make a lot of alliances. And perhaps he understood their avodah zarah as another way that he could fulfill what the kingship of David HaMelech, what Malchus David is really all about. Remember, it wasn't just going to be for us as Klal Yisrael, but we were going to be Orla nation, Orla Goyim, and eventually, all the different nations are going in the time of Mashiach are going to all come and pay their respects and join in the godless of Klal Yisrael. And so perhaps what Shlomo HaMelech was doing was that he was involving them so that he could actually make that happen. That his kingship, now that he has the Beis HaMikdash, and he has so much glory, and the glory is so palpable, he figured, you know what? I can bring it more. I can bring it all the way home. I could get it so that every nation is going to be absorbed into the beauty of Klal Yisrael. Now, unfortunately, that wasn't to be the case. He wanted so much to understand their mentality so that he could, so to speak, bring them over to his side. But we know that that's not always the case. Remember what happened with Sarah and Avram, where Sarah said, "Get Yishmael out of here. he's a bad influence and it's not going to go well. And at some point we put a limit and we say it doesn't work, right? You can't do kiruv if it's going to bring an entire family down, or if they're not on the level where they're ready for it. And in this case, for sure, the people, Hashem was saying, we're not ready for that time of Ba'achris Hayamim. And so Shlomo, while he definitely had the right intention, unfortunately, it didn't work in his favor. And there's another level of this, which is that Shlomo HaMelech knew that he was the wisest Mikol Adam. And as the wisest one, perhaps he rationally accepted all of the Torah, but he figured, you know what, this doesn't really apply to me, because I'm smart enough to be I'm not going to be outsmarted by my temptations, by my Satan, by my Yetzer Hara. And so for that reason, he didn't really fully recognize the fact that we have mitzvos, we can't understand the real reason behind the mitzvos. We do them because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is smarter than us. And as smart as Shlomo HaMelech was, he could not be smarter than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so for that reason, he really he had the right mentality, but it didn't work in his favor. And it really impacted on who he was as a human being, to the point where he found displeasure in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vaya'as Shlomo hara be'einei Hashem. It may not have been that he was doing an aveira, but rather it was just not what Hashem would have wanted for Shlomo HaMelech. And below milei acharei Hashem kedavid aviv, that what it's saying is that he didn't remain loyal, but not because he didn't start off that way, but unfortunately it didn't end up that way. And so for that reason, he really succumbed to the influences, not because, God forbid, he did avodah zarah. That's clear, he did not. But sometimes if you don't protest when someone else around you is doing something wrong, then that is also on your achrayus. And so he didn't stop these women from doing all of these avodah zarah on his turf. And so for that reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, no, you're going to bear a lot of that responsibility, as though you did avodah zarah. But God forbid, we know that that Shlomo HaMelech didn't actually do avodah zarah. So, as a result, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is upset. Vayomer Hashem l'Shlomo, and Hashem says to Shlomo, Yan asher ha'isa zos imach, because you're guilty of this. V'lo shamarta brisi v'chukosai asher tzivisi alecha. You didn't keep what I told you, which is just to listen, to follow the rules the way that I dictated them. Karoa ekra es hamamlacha me'alecha v'natzati l'abdecha. I'm going to have to take your kingdom and I'm going to tear it away from you. And I'm going to give it la'abdecha, to one of your servants. Ay, ach biyamecha lo ta'asena. But it's lama'an David avicha miyad bincha akar ena. I'm not going to take it away from you because of the sake of your father who I loved. I'm not going to do it in your lifetime, but I'm going to take it away from your son. What a terrible, terrible, terrible pasuk. To fully, the impact of it is so strong. And so he's not going to ever remove the kingship from Yehuda, but he's going to tear it apart from his son. And he's going to give Rak es kol hamamlacha lo ekra. I'm not going to tear the whole thing, but shevet echad etin lebincha. I'm going to give you one shevet, lama'an David abdi u'lama'an Yerushalayim asher bacharti, and that is for the sake of David and for the sake of Yerushalayim, because those are forever. And so ultimately, now Shlomo HaMelech is going to start to feel what it feels like to actually be at war with other nations. So the first one is Hadad HaEdomi, Hadad from Edom. Edom, we know Edom has historical significance. They've been an enemy of ours from time immemorial. Mizera HaMelech hu be'Edom, and so he's from the royal family of Edom. And And when David was in Edom, Yoav, his commander, went up to bury the people that had died, and he killed a lot of the males of Edom. And for Yoav and all the Bnei Israel, they stayed for 6 months. He had killed every male except for Hadad, who had gone and escaped. And so he was angry, and he escaped. He went all the way to Egypt. Some say he married the royalty in Egypt, and he was a young boy at that time. And so now he's come back with a real vengeance, and he wants to right the wrongs. Vayakumu Midyan vayabo Paran, and setting up for Midian, they came to Paran, and they took from Paran, and they came to Egypt, to the Paro, and who gave them all of this good stuff. Like I said, some say that he married her, one of the to be his wife, Achos Tachpenas Hagvira, the queen Tachpenas as a wife, and this ultimately was a very strong. So we have Edom, we have Paro. These are all nations that, historically speaking, have been a thorn in our side. And when Hadad heard in Egypt that David was that he was dead and that Yoav was dead, Hadad said to Paro, "Let me go back. I need to right these wrongs. I need to take care of this. Now it's my time." And Paro said, "Why? Why do you have to? What's wrong? Kima atachaser imi. What are you missing from me? What do you have to go back to your land for? What? Don't bother with this nonsense." But he had to, and it was Bayomer lo ki shalech t'shalchini. No, let me go. I have to go. And so there's this very strong anti-Semitic pull that is pulling him even against his rational thought. And perhaps that pull, that against his rational thought, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu pulling the strings and sending the first enemy. The next one is Rezon ben Eliada. Now, who is, and he fled from Hadad Ezer ben Melech Tzova. And when David was killing them, he gathered some of the men, and he became the captain of the troops, and they went to Damascus. They settled there, and this is more like the future enemies. These are the additional people that were adversarial, and he was an adversary of Israel all of the days of Shlomo, and he just added trouble that was caused by Hadad, and now the last one. So that represents more like the future people of the people in Aram. Now Yeravam ben Nevat, who was from Ephrati. Who is Nevat? Some say that is Micha from Pesel Micha, that story. But essentially, he was the son of a widow whose name was Shura, and he had worked for King Shlomo, and he was against Bayarim Yad Bamelech, and he went against the king. In what way did he go against the king? So truly, he felt that the Milo, remember that area that was really designated for the Bnei Israel, that was designated for them to come Aliyah L'Regel, he was really upset that he gave it over to the boss Paro. And so he was so angry about that. But he was a very capable guy, and he was a productive worker, and he was, he worked in the house of the Yosef representations. And Yeravam went out to Yerushalayim, and he sees Achaya Hashiloni, the Navi, and he meets him on the way. He put on a new robe, and when the two were alone in Levadam Basadeh, what happens? Achia takes hold of the new robe that he was wearing, and he tears it into 12 pieces. And he says, "Take 10 of the pieces," he said to Yeravam, "because ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to tear up the kingdom from Shlomo and give it to you with these 10 tribes. But one is going to be forever for David and Yerushalayim, and that is the that is going to be Yehuda. And why? Because they didn't do what was right. They worshipped Avodah Zarah. They did all of those things, and they didn't walk in the way. And he didn't walk in the way that his father did. But the whole kingdom is not going to be taken away from him. Only part of it, most of it. There's still going to be a little bit, and it's going to be taken out of his hands and given to you, and you're going to get the Aseret HaShvatim. Now, what ultimately started is that Yeravam ben Nevat actually had a lot of good. He was a loyal worker. He was a hard worker. However, when the mistake that he made was that when he attacked Shlomo in public about the Milo. Had he done it privately, it would have been a really good idea. It really isn't the right thing to do. You can't take away an area that could be designated to help in Kedusha and make it for something that's not Kadosh, that's Tameh. And so he had a lot of what was needed to really be good. But unfortunately, he took all the good and he twisted it. Now, when Shlomo tries to put Yeravam to death, but Yeravam runs away to Shishak, the king of Mitzrayim, and he remains there until Shlomo dies. And that's the end. That is literally the end of Shlomo HaMelech. That he had ruled over Yisrael for 40 years, and he was buried, and his son Rechavam is going to succeed him as the king. And it's it's anticlimactic to have that our beautiful King Shlomo went off in this way. But fortunately, we're going to have how he feels and so much more of the depth of who he was through Mishlei and through Koheles and Shir HaShirim. There's so much more that we are going to experience from Shlomo HaMelech. But here what we recognize is that we can't look at all the Mashalim and the Shiros and all the things that he created, because at the end of the day, he had something that really was important to highlight Ladoros, and that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes rules for a reason. We can't outsmart someone the power that is smarter than us all. And so there really is a very important lesson. Do not have too much of this world and the pleasures of this world. Have for sure, but have limitations and do it l'shem shamayim. Not to have too many wives, not to have too much wealth, and not to have too much horses. Because ultimately all of those take us away from what we know to be true, which is that all of this world is for our taking. However, it's to be Mekadesh LaHashem, and that we should have limits. And if the Torah gives us limits, we follow those limits. Because when we don't and we outsmart our, so to speak, what we're doing is we're making big blunders that have very, very grand and grave repercussions.